5th, 2014, Cinco de Mayo. It's the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Would you call the roll, please, Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Francisco. Hart.
Here.
Hotchkiss.
Here.
Rouse.
Here.
White. Mayor Pro Tem Murillo.
Here.
Mayor
Thank you.
Schneider.
Thank you. Any changes to the agenda?
No, there aren't, Madam Mayor Pro Tem.
Okay. And do you read the item?
Fiscal year 2015 recommended operating capital budget.
Mr. Armstrong, which department's going first?
The first department will be the airport department.
Okay. Whenever you're ready, Ms. Johns.
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. My name is Hazel Johns. I'm the Acting Airport Director, and with me today is Tom Bullers, our Administrative Analyst, and of course Tracy Lincoln, our Operations Manager. Today I'm going to do the department overview. Tom will talk about proposed changes in the budget, and then Tracy will follow up and do our performance measures. You all know this, of course, that the airport's an enterprise fund, and we are fiscally self-sufficient. And according to federal law, all of the revenue generated on the airport stays on the airport and is used for its operation, maintenance, and capital improvement. We have 8 programs in the department covering administrative areas, maintenance, operations, security, and capital improvements. Obviously, maintenance is the largest % of our staffing, followed by security. In the budget, there are 3 funds reported. The airport fund, which is about $15.7 million. And then we have the customer facility charge. You'll recall that's the $10 per contract fee on rent-a-car leases at the airport. And those funds are generated and used to pay the debt on the quick turn facility for the rent-a-car companies. The other fund that we have is the passenger facility charge fund. That's a fee of $4.50 on airline tickets based on our enplanements, and that money is generated and used to also assist in paying the debt on the terminal. Well, putting our budget together this year, about the week before it was due, we had unanticipated events when American Eagle told us that they were pulling their 4 flights to LA. Those 4 flights represent 13% of the passenger traffic. And as you can see on the slide, we were anticipating the loss of rent from American for the building rental, landing fees, and boarding bridge fees. Additionally, because of the passengers, about 53,000 in-plane passengers would be lost. That would also affect parking and all of our concessions. So that was almost $1 million that we were looking to lose. Similarly, the funds that I just mentioned would also lose because the fewer passengers you have, the fewer revenues that you receive. But we took some action, and shortly after we had the notice from the airlines, from American, about the loss, we met with the property managers with the other airlines, and they were aware of the loss and worked cooperatively with us to adjust the rates and charges so that not only did we make up the $355,000 potential loss, but we also anticipate having almost $100,000 over in airline fees.
Mayor.
Okay, we have a question, please.
Thank you. Can you back up one slide, please? I didn't catch.
Did I do right? There, sorry.
Yes. The capital grant fund, what is that?
That's the passenger facility charge grant and also the Airport Improvement Program grant that we received from FAA. The Airport Improvement Program grant is based on our enplanements.
Okay.
So you lose passengers, and then the formula would adjust down to where we would also lose potential money
Okay.
on
so-
that grant.
And so this money would come in annually? Or I just don't, where does it come from? And I mean, I hear it's FAA or it's federal of some kind. I don't understand this one, so.
Okay. It's the Airport Improvement Program, which is a federal program,
Okay.
trust funds through FAA.
Okay.
Each airport that has commercial service, there's a formula that they use to provide funds back to the airport based on their total number of in-plane passengers.
Okay.
So you go through the formula, and if you have less passengers, you receive less money. So what we were looking at was the potential in that loss, as well as the passenger facility charge.
Okay, and that would be just every year that amount of whatever that's just an annual cash flow
Loss.
thing that comes in.
Right, and it
based
would
on
continue.
enplanements.
Exactly, and it would continue to be a loss until we get passenger traffic back up. If we increase passenger traffic, then we make up that loss.
Yeah, okay, great.
We will. I promise.
Thank you.
Mr. Hotchkiss has a question.
Quick question. You said you made up for some potential losses by renegotiating with the airlines. Can you go into a little detail on that, or is that confidential information?
No, Councilman Hotchkiss, it's not confidential. Each year, the airline meets with the property managers from all of the airlines, and we negotiate rates and charges for their use, and it's based on our budget. We take our total operating budget, and we have a spreadsheet formula that we go through. And so we will be coming to council with those new rates. For example, currently the building rental is $84 per square foot, and it's going up to $90. Is that right, Tom? 94. 87, it's $87 to $94. And landing fees will go up, and boarding bridge use, that fee will also go up. And Tom will go into more detail on the fuel flowage fees that we're also doing.
Okay, will those increases decrease the use of the airport at all, do you expect?
I don't anticipate that it would adversely affect other carriers or the existing carriers in their continued routes that they have today or in new routes. It's still not that much money for the airlines.
And they do
And
this,
it was actually the airlines who recommended some of the increases
they do this all the time. They see it coming at every airport.
all the time at every airport.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
Go ahead, Mr. White.
Thank you. And then, how does this compare to our sibling airports? I expect like like the cities themselves, there are other airports that you look at as your peers,
That's
our peers.
Correct, Councilman.
How are these fees now in
Measured.
comparison to them? Yes.
Our estimated cost per in-plane passenger, that's the measurement that's used by all the airports. And ours is getting a little high because I'm projecting that if everything stays the way it is right now without any increase in passenger traffic, it would average about $11.44 per in-plane passenger. We would like to have it back down to 10 like we've had before, or 9. But it's totally based on the airlines. If they increase the load, then that rate goes down. That's what we'll be working on.
In comparison to, you say it's high, but I mean, like, what would be what would you consider to be the perfect or as close to perfect comparison airport and terminal? And obviously, there's going to be age of airports, age of terminal, and size and all that. Do you have one or two that come to mind, or?
I don't. I know that ours is higher than some airports just because we have debt. So if you have an older airfield and older terminal and you don't really have a debt on it, that
Right.
fee is going to be lower.
Right.
I would think that we are probably comparable right now to San Jose.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And do you know what their fees are?
Their fees are much greater than ours, but their cost per in-plane passenger is still about the same as ours, I believe.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. Okay, so continued losses. At this point, I'm going to ask Tom to go into the actual budget changes that we made.
So I really wanted to focus here on the gray recommended adjustment columns and just touch base on some of the more significant changes. The $181,000, like Hazel mentioned before, we increased the airline rates and charges, so there was no net loss there. We had a net increase. For the commercial, industrial, and non-commercial aviation, we've had some vacant properties, so we're projecting a little bit below what we were proposing in the original plan, fiscal year 15. In terminal, that $626,000 loss, that's the big loss from concessions and parking. We weren't able to mitigate that loss through raising parking rates. When we looked at it, we decided not to do that. And then overall, the bottom line is about a 4% decrease in revenues. And this is just a pie chart of percentages, and you can see it's spread pretty evenly across terminal, commercial industrial, and commercial aviation leases. We think that's a good thing. We're not too dependent on any one source of revenue. Historically, I guess it used to be more like 43% commercial industrial lease, but that's been going down over the years. And again, we're very heavily dependent on leases generally. I think it's 98% of our income. On the expenditure side, again, focusing on that gray column, the supplies and services, we've had some contractual increases and utility increases. For the special projects, when American Eagle pulled out, we decided to close long-term parking lot number 2 and discontinue the shuttle service, except for the peak holiday period, about 6 weeks. But that netted us about $800,000. And then overall, again, that's about a 4% decrease in expenditures. Another pie chart here. You notice our supplies and services is a fairly large portion of our budget. Of that, about $2.1 million is an interdepartmental agreement with the fire department to provide air rescue and firefighting services, and about $300,000 for engineering to provide capital associated support. And I also would note the special projects budget, that's where the parking shuttle was about 5% of our budget in years past, and now it's about 1%. We're also proposing some changes to our capital program. Hazel mentioned the airport improvement program. It's a grant program. It has a very favorable match, about 10 to 90%, a little bit more than that. So we're proposing to put aside the match that we intend or anticipate having to make. And we also have to front the change order authority for construction contracts. And then if we use that, the FAA will seek reimbursement from the FAA. The airport.
Councilmember Rouse has a question.
Thank you. Back to the question about the shuttle, the elimination of the shuttle program. Is the shuttle program part of MTD, or is that an airport entity?
It's an airport entity.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Hart?
I guess while we're talking about the lot, just you obviously track the usage of the lots that you have, and so you feel very confident that the 6-week period when you are going to reopen the lot during the holiday season it covers it. Is there any other gray areas where you're a little worried that you're not going to have enough parking in the existing lots, or is it that black and white?
Councilman Hart, with 13% reduction in passengers, we did do exactly that. We checked the long-term lot at the terminal and calculated that we felt that we had sufficient parking spaces for the employees, about 100 spaces at a time. and the balance of the lot to handle most of the operations at the airport currently. It's if we have when the peak periods hit, and if we have a need, we will gear up right away quick to use the Lot 2, the remote lot. But right now, I think we do have sufficient parking both in long-term and in short-term at the terminal.
So the issue is the employees, theoretically, is there a way to communicate with the employees to say, this isn't working, we need you to move somewhere else, and then is that what you would do?
I could move the employees. It would probably be easier to move the employees and then use the close-in parking lot for the passengers. Although there are a lot of passengers who like the door-to-door service better. And it would be easy to communicate to the employees. We just contact the TSA, the airlines. We could do that quickly.
Thank you.
I have a question about the lot, if I could. When did it close?
Councilman Hotchkiss, officially we closed Lot 2 on April 1st.
And have you had much public reaction?
I've had a couple of emails where they prefer to do the door-to-door service, and some prefer the slightly lesser fee for parking. But for the whole month, I think I've had 2 emails.
Okay, and you said that lot was mostly employee there?
Mostly employee. I think we were getting approximately $9,000 to $12,000 a month out of the lot. Not nearly enough to cover the $800,000 to operate.
Right, well, this doesn't really represent a loss because those people are now parking closer in.
Closer in, that's correct.
Okay, thanks.
So back to our second proposed change is to the emergency notification phone system. That is a direct phone system between the tower, 911 dispatch, the ARF building in case of an emergency. The system is about 25 years old, and there's no more replacement parts. Long-term Lot 1, we're proposing to resurface and restripe the lot. It's been 8-ish years since we've done that, and it's about time for it to be resurfaced. I'm going to talk a little bit about the proposed fees. The first one is a change to the maximum daily rate in long-term Lot 2. Currently, it's $9. We're proposing it goes to $10. We looked at 11 comparable California airports. The average for those lots was $13. I think the median was $12. So we're still under those airports. We think this will probably be a revenue neutral change because of the short-term nature of Lot 2 now, with it being closed most of the year. Hazel touched on the fuel flowage fees. We anticipate gaining about $175,000 total from increasing the fuel flowage fees. The airport director has the authority to raise these fees July 1st of each year in the operations agreements with the FBOs. So we're proposing to increase the non-airline jet fuel rate from 5 cents to 8 cents per gallon. We're proposing to increase the avgas, or not to increase the avgas, to keep it steady at 5 cents a gallon. And we're proposing to institute a new fee on the commercial airlines of 4 cents. And when we did that, we looked at some of these numbers, and the general trend has been an increase in fuel flowage fees at the airports we surveyed, and also that they've been implementing these fees at commercial airports as well, on the commercial airlines.
I'm confused. How much does it cost a gallon then? When you say fuel flowage fee, are we talking volume, like so much a gallon?
Yeah.
So how much is it for general aviation gas?
We generate total number. Well, I don't know what the
Mr. Armstrong might know this better than anybody else.
The total cost for general aviation, the avgas is about $5.70, $5.80 a gallon at the self-fuel island.
So this will increase it by 5 cents, as it were?
Actually, the way it's proposed, it'll remain the same. for the general aviation avgas. For the airlines, my understanding is they're much less, probably in the $4 a gallon range. So this would add 4 cents to it.
Different kind of fuel, though, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Well, may I ask a question there? So you're not thinking it'll discourage, I mean, we're trying to increase commercial airline use of our airport, right?
Yeah, and we negotiated with the airlines too. They were in at the table when we were proposing these changes, and they agreed to all these changes as well. They didn't think it would have an impact on their operations.
Okay.
And this is just a cash flow analysis looking out if we don't make any changes. I'm going to highlight the gray line at the bottom there. You see expenditures growing faster than revenues. And in fiscal year 16 and 17, there's an increase in the net loss to the airport. But in fiscal year 18, that's reversed when the ampersand lease expires near the end of the year and increases our revenue significantly. The other thing I want to note about this slide is there's no money being contributed to capital transfers. Historically, we've put in about $500,000 just for maintenance projects. And then there's also the matching funds for the AIP grant that we would need to put in as well that are not shown here.
Mr. Hart?
So I guess the question of that, so you're foregoing that, those investing, building up reserves essentially for capital, and is a strategy because of this unique revenue loss from the airlines pulling out? Is that different things, connected things?
At this point, if, as Tom said, if nothing changes, no increase in air service, and all of our rates and charges and fees stay the same, the airport's going to have to cut the budget in order to balance, and then also to come up with the money for capital and for the matching part of the grant. Keeping in mind that with all of those leases, the airport has a contractual obligation to maintain the exterior. So we really do have to have some funds set aside. Now, this doesn't mean that we don't have our council mandated revenues, that are reserves. Those are fully funded. But we really need to gear up and find a way to generate some extra money.
Yeah, so this is the ongoing maintenance needs of the physical airport that's being challenged right now because of this unique situation with American Airlines leaving. And then so then long term, and I hope I'm not jumping ahead on the slides, but long term you have the strategy for land leases, trying to add revenue from land leases. You've got tenants that are missing, and you're going to fill those. And then I know you're also talking about other development on the land side. Is that part of the strategy too, long term, to grow revenues? And am I jumping ahead on the slide program?
No, you're not jumping ahead. Well, I don't think that we addressed that in this particular budget, but you're exactly right. We do have some existing vacant properties that we will be leasing, hopefully between now and the end of the calendar year. And there is the long-term development for the north side, where we have the specific plan area. So we'll be working on that as well. But on the aviation side of things, at the terminal, it's really dependent on the airlines and the service that we have, because if we don't have the seats, it's very difficult to generate additional revenue.
Are the two, are they connected financially, or are they segregated financially? The land leases and the airport operations?
It's all put into the one fund.
So I guess to help me out to understand the order of magnitude we're talking about in terms of additional leases. So you fill up the existing empty tenants with tenants. Is that, how much is that as an increase in revenue, ballparkish? Is it a couple $100,000? Is it $500,000? Is it
Probably between $150,000 to $200,000 a year.
okay? And so you really do need either passengers or the airport-specific plan development, because that would be a bigger number. That would get you, the combination of that and the tenancies being filled would get you in the $500,000-ish range.
Exactly.
Okay.
Secondly, in 2019, a full year of having the ampersand facility revert to the airport, that also substantially increases our revenue in general aviation.
What is that delta from existing lease to projected future
about $2 million.
Oh, okay. Well, that's the biggest thing in the whole equation. Now I get it. Thank you.
So we can hold tight. We've got
Now I understand the whole plan.
And now, I believe the next deal is performance measures, and Tracy will go over those for us.
Good afternoon. Some key performance measures for next year. We will be updating our minimum standards, which developed exactly as described, minimum standards for certain... I apologize. My mic was not on, my bad.
Good, yeah, start over, thanks.
I'm happy to, thank you. We will be developing, the airport has minimum standards, and we are going to get a committee together and review and update the minimum standards. They're very important, and it is the standards that all of the people providing aeronautical services must meet. We develop different standards for each type of service, as well as special event guidelines for use of the Earl Ovington terminal. There's a lot of buzz around town about that terminal. We've had several requests. We had a function in there for our own department that many folks attended, and it went well, so we're going to look at formalizing it. We'll develop a frequent flyer parking incentive program to keep the 2 lots that are open full. And then implement a strategic marketing plan to increase awareness of SBA air service. We're already reaching down into the south portion of Ventura there, trying to grab some of those 900,000 people down there. This is, of course, due to the extreme drought, we will be replacing turf at 2 buildings with drought-tolerant landscape. We will install a big request for this, additional charging station for the passenger electronic devices. And the first one's going in baggage claim. People get off that plane, and even though their phones were supposed to be turned off, they're all dead. So the update on the airfield pavement markings to comply with new standards and FAA recommendations, they've upgraded, and so we need to comply. And identify a proposed Goleta Slough mouth management strategy. You may recall we had an issue with the mouth being dammed up, and it posed a significant problem for us. So we're looking at a long-term solution.
Mr. Rouse has a question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Lincoln.
The Goleta Slough mouth now, is that going to be our responsibility in perpetuity, or is that still going to be part of the flood control district, or how's that going to go?
We will be working with the flood control district to determine whose share of the pie it is. We like to think that we will bring flood control on board. There's one of the reasons we got the emergency permit was to prevent health and safety hazards on the flood controls authority area, not just the airport. So
But it also presents a potential aviation hazard as well.
It certainly does. So we will be speaking with them at length.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Hotchkiss and then Mr. Hart.
The charging station has multiple outlets?
It will have multiple outlets, yes, not just for a single instrument.
Right, so what are we talking, 5, 10, what?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I apologize.
And then following up on Councilmember Rouse's question about the Goleta Slough mouth. So there's a bunch of different agencies involved in that. There's the Coastal Commission, Fish and Wildlife, Flood Control, County of Santa Barbara too?
Yes, that's correct. And the agency that most recently brought the concern forward that prevented us from opening it was the National Marine Fisheries.
Even more. So you're going to work with all of those agencies over this upcoming year to hopefully come to a resolution as to what you might do, and then you'd have to spend multiple more years sort of actually implementing that, getting the permit, getting all the MOUs with all the different organization agencies, and so this is just year one of a 4-year effort?
Our planner would be much more proficient at estimating the timeline, but the years I've spent in government tells me that 4-year estimate is reasonable.
Not reasonable, but it's accurate.
A better way to describe it, thank you.
Thank you.
We will be performing a full revision of the airport security program. The TSA sent in so many kind of patchwork or Band-Aid changes. We're going to go through and revise the whole thing and just make it a better document. We'll be doing a tabletop exercise of our emergency plan. We'll be preparing the draft environmental impact report for the airport master plan, and we are updating the wildlife management plan, and that actually begins with an updated wildlife assessment, and then after the assessment, we updo the management plan. update. Oh, there's more. Capital projects, okay. We will complete construction of runway 15 left, 33 right, pavement rehabilitation. We will purchase 4 lighted X's for runway closures. Those are very important safety item when we're out there working on the runways. We will complete the design and secure bids for airfield lighting rehabilitation. Very important project. Airport fund, we will replace the emergency notification phone system. We mentioned that a little earlier. And then we will resurface and restripe long-term parking lot 1. We also mentioned that a bit earlier. And then on March 19, 2014, the Airport Commission recommended approval of the Airport Department's annual fiscal year 2015 budget.
Is that it?
That concludes our presentation, and we'd be happy to answer any further questions.
In case you didn't hear, Councilmember Hotchkiss is back to being the liaison to the Airport Commission, so you'll be seeing him at your meetings.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
And Mr. Hotchkiss, do you want to go ahead since I've given you a shout out?
Start off a bang here. Any timeline on progression of getting some of our service back from the airlines that either dropped out or replacing them, or is it too soon to tell?
I think it's too soon to tell, but we do have, working with the airline consultant that we have, Chris Warren with Intervista, we do plan to meet, as he indicated in his presentation, the Jumpstart is a conference or a meeting where airlines come in and airports make a business pitch for their service. That will be held this June, so we will be attending and participating in that activity. We also are following up with American Eagle for an on-site visit at their headquarters in Dallas. We continue to do our marketing and staying as active as we can to make sure that our seats are full, and also working with the airlines to tweak the schedule. I understand that United will be changing out the aircraft going to Los Angeles June 5th. They'll be putting in RJs, which will increase the number of seats available going that direction, and it's possible that they'll also do an RJ going to San Francisco this summer. So that would also benefit us by increasing our load capacity.
When we approach these airlines, what characteristic do we use to try to make us stand out, if I could put it that way? Or is there one? Maybe everybody is saying, hey, number of passengers, it's not wonderful Santa Barbara, it's just number of passengers, period.
I think one of the important things that we bring to the table is to explain Santa Barbara is a wonderful tourist destination. There's no doubt about that. But equally, or even similarly important, is it's a business community. There are a lot of high-tech business in town and going down the coast. I mean, we really do have an economic need for increased service. And I think that changes their mind when they hear that, because they just think it's beautiful and rich. So we try to, in our presentation, point out all of the different businesses that are here and the business need for that service as well. And that does make a difference. Mm-hmm.
Mr. Hart?
Well, kind of following up on the same thing, I'm fascinated by the difference in approach from, that we heard from the consultants about the headwind in dealing with, trying to get additional service and the systemic issues that airlines are struggling with and the extremely low profit margins for that business. And on the other hand, when we ask to raise fees and negotiate with them, they seem, sure, that's okay. We can live with that. And they're doing these negotiations with all these airports all over the country. I can't understand how those things connect. How can you be such a super low profit margin business where every penny counts, and yet you're not resistant, systemically to fee increases? What?
I can't answer that specifically, except to say that the airlines have also unbundled their services. As you all know, if you fly, now you pay for luggage and you pay for a blanket and you pay for food on board. All those funds come in, and that's really what has assisted the airlines in making money. Not only the premium, as Chris pointed out in his presentation, the fares are pretty close to a premium. There's not that much movement left, but they are making billions of dollars with unbundling. Additionally, if fuel prices go down, that's the main indicator for the airlines. I mean, that's their profitability is based on the cost of fuel. So that margin as well. And I think what their game plan is to transition all of the inefficient regional 50-seat regional jets and set those aside and start bringing on economically efficient operated aircraft. That will make a difference.
So I guess the real answer to my question is equipment, labor, and fuel is much more significant than the fees we're talking about. So it is almost budget dust to them, and that's why they don't resist.
Historically, airport fees to airlines are around 4 to 5% of their total
But if their
cost.
profit margins as corporations is
It's
4
4
to
to
5%, you'd think that would matter to them. But it's good that they agreed to it. So there you go. Weird way to do a business.
Good. Well, I wanted to congratulate you on replacing the turf with drought-tolerant plants. I think the city should set an example for the rest of our community. And also, congratulations on taking stewardship of the Goleta Slough. There are so many agencies involved, Councilmember Hart, because it's a waterway, there's wetlands, it connects to the shore and to the beach, and we're talking about birds and fish. So, and the Goleta Slough Management Committee, is it still meeting? And can you say for the public who might be, I think those are public meetings, is that correct, Mr. Lincoln?
I believe they are public meetings, and they do meet monthly.
Okay, well, I'll find that out. Any other questions or comments for our airport staff? It looks like we're happy, Ms. Johns, thank you. Okay, and so while we're switching over to waterfront, I think that's next. I wanted to remind the public that we're in the middle of budget season, and these are ongoing budget hearings, and the next one is a week from today, Monday, May 12th, here in council chambers, starting at 3. And the departments coming up on Monday the 12th are the fire department and the police department, always of interest to the public. Next week, on Wednesday, May 14th, it's the Community Development Department or our Planning Department and Library. Yay. And so that's 1 o'clock from 1 to 4 here in council chambers. So next Monday, Fire and Police. Next Wednesday, Planning and Library. And welcome to the waterfront staff, and whenever you all are ready to start.
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem Murillo. My name is Brian Bossi, and I'm joined today with our director, Scott Reedman, Carl Treiberg, and Mick Kronman, and that rounds out our management staff for the waterfront department. I'm the business manager, and somewhat similar to the airport, we have a similar presentation. We're going to start off, as far as an outline is concerned, with a brief department overview. We'll then get into proposed changes to the original fiscal year 2015 plan. We'll look into our proposed changes as well and finish up with, I should say, with our key performance objectives and our capital projects. I should also let you know that on April 17th, we were at our Harbor Commission, and they recommended that we forward our budget presentation to, or our budget, I should say, to City Council. So here we are today. As far as an organization, we have Mr. Reedman, who is our director. We then have 3 primary divisions: our Business Services Division, our Harbor Operations Division, which is headed up by Mick Kronman, and that includes Harbor Patrol and Marina Management, our Facilities Division, which is Carl Treiberg and his folks, and that's Facilities Maintenance, as well as Facilities Design and Capital Improvements. And then again, I am the business manager, and with that role, I take on the property management duties with staff, as well as financial management and all of our parking services. And the budget. A little more information. We have 46 permanent staff at the Waterfront Department. That includes the breakdown, 4 managers, actually it's 3 managers and our director. You can see supervisors, our Harbor Patrol officers, we have 10, and we have 27 general employees. We have had no permanent staffing increase in 12 years, so we have remained at that 46 full-time employee level for quite some time. We do have a good amount of hourly employees. We have a few in our Harbor Patrol. We We have a few in our facilities, and we have a good chunk in our parking services throughout the year, primarily in the summer months, which we're currently getting stacked up for. Jumping right into our revenues, we have this spreadsheet, and I'll go into a pie chart if you're a more visual person. Big changes, well, not really any big changes this year as far as our revenues are concerned. Proposed changes to our original plan, you'll see under our leases other. These are leases we have. This includes our leases with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. They have some offices. UCSB has their sailing group down there. So it's kind of our odds and ends leases, if you will. We anticipate a slight decrease in that lease revenue of about $18,000. The primary reason for that is NOAA, with their new building out at the UCSB campus, they vacated about 2/3 of their space in the Maritime Museum building there and moved out to UCSB. They kept 2 offices, but that reduced the rate significantly. Those offices were then picked up by Chuck's Waterfront Grill. They had the first right of leasing those spaces, and so they did. The interesting thing, though, is that with their lease minimum as well as their percentage rent, those leases added to their minimum, but however, they never pay the minimum. They're always in a percentage rent basis because the restaurant does so well. So it's almost as if those leases were just absorbed, and we won't see any financial gain out of that. However, their percentage lease rent has continued to climb dramatically over the last few years. I believe last year alone it went up almost 75% at one particular portion of the year. So they're doing quite well. So we are seeing the revenue generated, not necessarily from the offices, but from the services they provide there at the restaurant. Our interest income, that's controlled by the finance department, and as we all know, that's not the greatest thing on earth, and it's going down a little bit, about $15,000 we estimate, along with finance staff. Our miscellaneous, the change there is down about $70,000, and that's primarily due to cruise ship revenues. This year we saw 28 cruise ships. Our last was yesterday for the season, the spring season, I should say. And next year we anticipate, right now we have a solid 22 to 23, but we're hoping that, or it's looking like that will go up, but we based our we base the cut on about 5 to 6 fewer ships next year. And it's a very fickle industry, and they can call on a minute's notice and say we're not going to show up. So we try to hedge those revenues conservatively.
We have a lot of lights for you. So it was Mr. Rouse, and then Hart, and then Hotchkiss. Oh, no. Oh, Mr. White, please, first.
Thank you. This is a question about when would we be talking about cruise ships, as far as how many and what's a good idea? Maybe I'm asking that of Mr. Armstrong. Is this a good time to do that, or do we do that? Is there another?
Well, in terms of the financial implications of it, this is a good time to do it. If you wanted a broader policy discussion about how many in a year, we hadn't planned on it unless council wanted to do that.
Okay. Well, I'll introduce that and then see whether other council members have your antenna up in that. I'm finding that the pushback has begun on for me, the first round, the 18 was smooth sailing, and now the 30 was what it was stated. It sounds like it's not coming in at 30, it's coming in at 28 or something like that. I'm just getting the comments and the just feedback that's got some negativity to it, whereas as I say at the 18 it was it was like no harm, no foul kind of thing. So I want to put that out there, because obviously what we're all trying to do is find the sweet spot on this, and I can say that we might have jumped ahead of it a little bit. So that's just
Is it air pollution that people are talking about?
No, I think it's just impact on the community.
Okay. Mr. Hotchkiss, please.
Have any of the cruise companies ever spoken about staying here more than a day at a time, so they come one day and then leave the next?
Councilmember Hotchkiss, I believe we had one request like that a couple years ago, but no, we have not. We don't see any of that on the horizon.
Mr. Hart.
In terms of the change from FY 14 to 15, the intergovernmental change, can you explain to me? That's just such a big change. What was that?
Sure, I'm happy to. Mayor Pro Tem Murillo, Councilmember Hart, that is our division, I should say, of Boating and Waterways loan. This is to one of Carl's his biggest project, and that's a rebuilding of Marina One. And so in this particular year, fiscal year 14, we were working on design for the next two phases, or I should say the next phase. And so that's the $100,000. So you see that big jump up to 1.676. That's to fund the next two fingers of that particular project. So yes, that is a big gain, and it looks like our revenues increased significantly, almost $2 million. But really, when you factor that in, actually take that out as well as $100,000, it's more of about a 1.5% increase from year to year as far as revenues are concerned. And again, we are one thing I forgot to mention, very weather-dependent department. Both our commercial leases with all our restaurants that do very well, they seem to do a whole lot better when the weather is good. And that makes sense, as is our parking. It's a sunny day down in the waterfront, you're going to get the parking lots full. If it's a cloudy day, it's going to be real slow.
Thank you.
Well, I'm curious about miscellaneous. It's always like other miscellaneous. But were you working your way down? I wasn't. Or were you?
The miscellaneous, that $70,000 reduction was the cruise ships.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And that miscellaneous includes everything from our ice machine for the commercial fishermen to the cruise ship. So a big, broad range of revenue-generating items.
Thank you.
And here is for the more visually inclined folks out there. You can see from this pie chart, our revenue we're estimating again at about a little over $14.3 million. And again, once you factor in that Division of Boating and Waterways loan, both last year and this year, it turns out to be about a 1.5% increase. So again, very conservative. But again, we've had two spectacular years as far as weather is concerned. Definitely not as far as rainfall is concerned. So I know you folks are going to be talking about that in another session. But it's worked out down at the waterfront. As you can see, our slip rentals equal about 29% of that $14.3 million. Next on the list are the leases with food service. And following right behind that are our parking fees and our permits down at the waterfront parking lots. Waterfront fund expenditures. These are proposed changes to the original FY15 plan. You'll see on the left the different programs we have, our salaries and benefits, supplies and services, all the way on down to our debt service. Big changes, or I should say changes for this year. We've got a slight increase in our salaries and benefits, primarily due to contracts and things of that nature. Our supplies and services are looking to go up by about $70,000. Our allocated costs by about $16,000. You'll see our special projects is going up by almost $77,000. And that's, let me explain that. Last year in July, the council was working with MTD on the waterfront shuttle and the costs associated with that. And so as part of fixing that financial shortfall, the price was kind of divvied up, apportioned accordingly to various departments. And our share of that was $40,000. And so that came a little after the budget was approved. So what we did this year is we used our $40,000 from appropriated reserves to cover that. And so this year, our portion of the MTD shuttle, it's not the $40 now, it's now the $76,943. So it is an increase of, if you think about it, more of $36,000. But again, as it shows in this, it's $76,943. We have a slight increase in our equipment budget of $8,000. And you'll see down on the bottom, our debt service, working with finance. Actually, finance was a huge player in this and led the charge on it. Let me think of the word. we refinanced, thank you, our COPs, our certificates of participation, and bonds at the waterfront. And so what that did, we got a better rate, and what it did is just this first year alone, it's going to reduce our payments by about $116,000. And it's a little less than that in future years, but I believe the sum total is roughly around $1 million of savings over the next 10 plus years. So that was a very positive thing, reduction of that. And that is our graphic presentation of our expenditures. And here is our pie chart of those same expenditures. Again, compared to the previous year, the $13,395,000 is 0.2% decrease. So not much, but it is a decrease, and we're always happy to see that. Our salaries and benefits are at 45%. Supplies and services come in next at 19%, and then we work our way down debt service, transfers total, as well as allocated costs, and down the list. So again, a slight reduction, a slight increase in our revenues, 1.5%, a slight decrease in expenditures of about 0.2%. Our proposed fee changes for fiscal year 2015, we are proposing a 2% slip fee increase, and that is similar to what we've done in the past few years. We are also proposing a stoppage of the 25-foot slip transfer fee. I shouldn't say stoppage. They will continue to be charged, but we will freeze them. We are proposing to freeze them at $350 a foot. Looking at a little bigger, our slip transfer fee, we are again looking to increase that slip transfer fee by $25 per foot. So it will go from $350 this year to $375 per foot in fiscal year 2015. Now, again, that last one, please note that per our proposed changes, that would not include the 20-foot slips or the 25-foot slips. The 20-foot slips were closed at $200 a foot 10, 12 years ago, I believe it was. So they remain at $200 per foot. As far as our key performance objectives.
Mr. Hart has a question, please.
Yes.
The policy decision to freeze that 12 years ago, can you help me out with the history of that? I should actually know that.
Councilmember Hart, that was a policy decision with the smaller slips, and as we go up in price, we'll freeze them gradually as the slips get larger and larger. So this is why you're seeing us proposing to freeze the 25-footers now.
And what's the reasoning again for freezing the fees?
As the transfer fee gets higher and higher, in the case of the 20-footers, it was $4,000. It begins to put pressure and slow down the transfers themselves, drive them underground, and so forth. So when it gets to a certain level, we want to stop that charge so as not to put a damper on the transfers themselves and not to drive them underground where we don't get anything at all.
Got it. Thank you.
But part of it's also just we used up all of the wait list for the 20-footers. So basically, there was nobody left on the wait list.
So they are transferring?
Yeah.
Yep. Got it. Thank you.
Mr. Rouse?
Just a little curious, because I know this is a unique harbor compared to other harbors. Always interesting to compare apples for apples. But in terms of the pie chart and revenues, how similar is that to other harbors, or is it? And in terms of how we price items like this or rentals in general, is there a standard, or are we kind of in our own little universe? How does that work?
Mayor Pro Tem Murillo, Councilmember Rouse, great question. As far as overall revenues for our waterfront area versus other harbors, each harbor is different. We can't really compare ourselves to Avila. We can't compare ourselves to Ventura. Avila is much smaller. Ventura is much larger, has hotels, a lot more space, a lot more restaurants, a lot more slips, private marinas, the whole thing. And we are working on an economic study that we're having done for us, and that's shedding some light on how things compare with at least Ventura. As far as slip rates and slip fees, we do a survey every year in February of 17 different marinas up and down the coast, and we compare very favorably. We are not on the expensive side by any means. We are very much, for the most part, well below other marinas, especially those from Point Conception on down. So we compare very favorably. So that's kind of how we judge where we're at as far as fees. The 2% fee increase, we also do that to keep in line with our Division of Boating and Waterways loan. We have to have a certain debt coverage ratio, and this helps us to maintain that. That goes back to that $1.676 million we're going to see this year to help fund the Marina One reconstruction.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Rouse, if I could add a bit to that. We have the three major sources of revenue: the lease program, the marina management program, and the parking program. A lot of other harbors don't have a Stearns Wharf, for instance. Oceanside has a pier, Monterey has a wharf. Many other harbors don't have a parking program at all. Channel Islands, Ventura, it's free. And our parking program is now $2.5 million. So we have these other streams of income that help us. Subsidize isn't the right word for the slip fees, but it helps us balance it among the other pieces of the pie. I hope that helps clarify.
Okay, key performance objectives for fiscal year 15. In property management, we continue to maintain accurate sales reporting by auditing 25% of our leases annually. Parking services, we maintain our operating expenses below 45% of our revenue collected, and we continue to fine-tune that and want to get that down even lower. I believe this year it was around 50, but we want to continue down that road. Our Harbor Patrol, they do a lot of coordinating with the various other safety departments and agencies within the county, and they're going to coordinate 3 joint agency emergency response drills. And I should, as you can see there, I've also outlined where these are in your particular document, the budget document.
Mr. Hart has a question.
Just, is there any way to compare the downtown parking to that expense ratio, or is that just a completely different scale of operation and cost ratio?
That's a great question. We've kind of given up comparing to downtown parking. They are a much bigger operation with a lot more spaces. I believe we have around 2,500 spaces, which is a lot. But again, all of ours are surface-oriented. They've got a number of structures. We deal with trailers. We deal with permits. We deal with all sorts of different things. But and consequently, we have far fewer employees. So it's kind of an apples to oranges. We could look more into it in the coming years if you'd like.
I get the difference in the economy of scales.
The other thing is that the downtown parking operation has the 75-minute free parking, which is about 2/3 of their transactions.
But wouldn't that actually help their expense ratio?
No.
Theirs would be higher.
Their expense ratio would be higher because they...
Yeah. So maybe that's it. Is it? I mean, are they comparable numbers, or are they?
No, because,
or maybe even better historically. Has this been something that you've just been grinding down over time? That if we went back 10 years.
The waterfront looks at parking as actually a revenue source that helps support the other functions. Whereas if you think about downtown parking, we pretty much its expenses and revenues are similar because they plow everything back into the system, other than a few of the things like helping out on the downtown maintenance.
Mm-hmm.
But a big part of it is that 2/3 of their transactions are for free, whereas everybody at the harbor pays first dollar for parking. Even the slip holders, that's into their rates.
So then the income to expense ratio is higher for downtown parking than it is at this 45%.
Yes.
Okay, that's I guess where I was going with that. Thank you.
Let's see, where were we? I think we're on the next page. Marina management. Continue to support our Clean Marina program by conducting our annual seafloor debris cleanup, which actually this year's version took place on Saturday, and Mick was in charge of that. I believe he had over 40 community volunteers come out and haul a whole bunch of interesting things from the seafloor in the marina. Our facilities maintenance, one of the projects we're going to be doing is redecking the Marina 2 main walkway, and I'll get into that in a second. And as far as facilities, we will be completing the construction of Phase 5 of the Marina 1 replacement project, which is the J&K Fingers, and that kind of stole my own thunder here.
Quick question, if I could. On the cleanup, I assume most of the stuff is things that have just gone overboard in the course of living on board. Is that correct?
I'd say that's a pretty fair assessment, although you do find some things in there that...
Kitchen sink occasionally or something?
Among other sorted items from the bathroom, yes.
All right, let's leave that one alone. On the Harbor Patrol call, what's the predominant reason for a Harbor Patrol call? Is there one? Is it fire departments is 75% of theirs, 72% of theirs is medical, but we don't have stuff like that, do we?
Mayor Pro Tem, Councilmember Hodges, it's a wide range. It's medical, not too many fire, thankfully, medical enforcement, but a vast majority of it is assist. It can be assisting boaters, it can be assisting kiteboarders or windsurfers. The assists tend to go up in the summertime when everybody on everything is boating or going out.
Sort of a safety issue then, right?
Safety, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's all about public safety.
Right. Thank you, sir.
Our key capital projects for fiscal year 15 include, as I stated, our Marina One dock replacement, and that will be, I believe, our J&K fingers. We're on phase 5 of an eight-phase, $14 million project. Marina renovation, that's an ongoing project, just keeping things up and running in the marina. Our power replacement, same thing with Stearns Wharf. Those are replacement of timbers and piles on Stearns Wharf. Our parking lot maintenance, obviously our parking lots see a whole lot of activity, and so this year's will be focused on our commercial area adjacent to Brophy Brothers and in and around those alleys. Next, we have an ADA handrail improvements. We will be redoing one of the harbor restrooms, Marina 4, up to ADA standards and similar to some of our other restrooms. We'll be upgrading the 117 Harborway Electrical, and that's the building that houses at the front end Brophy Brothers and on the back end the Fish Market. We're going to bring that up to code. We'll also be bringing Marina 2, 3, and 4 end ties up to state guidelines, and we'll be replacing 2 of the 3 lift stations on Stearns Wharf. So that's a total of a little over $3 million capital program. Again, 1.6, almost 1.7 of that is through the Division of Boating and Waterways. And that concludes my presentation, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. Mr. Rouse.
Thank you. In terms of capital plans and whatnot, what's the status on the metering of individual slips?
Mayor Pro Tem Murillo, Councilmember Rouse, as we build out Marina 1, we will incrementally install submeters, and as we go ahead and build out the fingers on Marinas 2, 3, and 4, we're doing the same thing. We're probably 50% through the entire marina, so in probably about 4 years, the entire harbor will be done, and at that time, we'll roll out a submetering program.
Is that included in the capital program, or is that?
No, we're absorbing those costs as part of other capital improvements, so it's not a standalone improvement. It's rather expensive. It's easier to kind of absorb a couple fingers at a time, 50, 100 slips at a time. So it's part of the bigger project.
Intent to have transmitting meters or red meters, or is that still a matter of debate as well?
Yeah, well, that's still to be determined.
Thank you.
Mr. White.
Thank you. Are we in year 3 on the having the electronic payment systems in a couple of the waterfront parking lots? Can you describe that process, how that's doing, any changes that's made in your operations and cash flow, et cetera?
Mayor Pro Tem Murillo, Councilmember White, we installed what is known as the Luke self-pay parking systems in all eight of our pay-on-foot lots, and it was a great decision, and we're thankful to have put that into place. We have seen revenue increases because I think people are more apt to go stick a debit card in and actually pay for their parking as opposed to try and fold up a dollar bill and shove it in there. So we've gotten a whole lot more participation out of people. So that's on the revenue side. We've seen our revenues increase. On the staff side of it, we've seen reductions in staff time. No longer will we have people having to, they folded up those dollar bills. Somebody had to unfold them, count them, stack them, which was very labor intensive. So we don't have that anymore, which is nice. We find that I believe we're approaching 40 to 50% of our transactions are debit or credit card related, so people are definitely more apt to do that than put cash in. So we've seen the revenue side of it increase, and we've seen our labor costs go down. So all in all, it's been a great project. We've actually been working with the downtown parking folks. They're going to be installing some similar systems in some of their surface lots. They're looking to. So we've been helping them out, and we work back and forth with technology and things like that to make ourselves more efficient. So it's been a big help, definitely.
Mr. Hart?
So can you just talk about the big picture about capital? Are you fine with your capital investments and revenue streams for that long term?
Madam Mayor Pro Tem, Councilmember Hart, we're looking at it. We didn't present our 6-year cash flow program today because with our escalating debt service from the Division of Boating and Waterways loan, our 6-year cash flow goes upside down and our expenses get higher than our revenues about 3 years out. But we're having a tremendous year this year in terms of savings on expenditures and additional revenues. So we didn't even want to look at it closely until we get into our capital planning this fall, at which point we will dig into that. But overall, we're very happy with the plan as it's been going so far. We're done with the breakwater. Marina 1 is, almost halfway there. So the launch ramp project's done, virtually all with grant money. And we're incrementally improving our ADA access throughout the harbor and the wharf. So we're aggressively pursuing our capital program, and we'll continue to do so.
Anything you want to share about dredging? I guess this was a tough year looking back historically, but it's always a question fundamentally of the federal government assistance for the dredging operation, right?
Yes, Councilmember Hart. We've been assured of our FY15 funding. Mm-hmm. Our FY16 funding is not so assured. I was at a CMANC meeting, California Marine Affairs and Navigation Conference, in January, and one of the Army Corps folks turned to me and just kind of casually mentioned that our FY16 funding was in jeopardy, which I just about choked on my lunch at that point. But we commissioned, as Brian mentioned earlier, we commissioned an economic impact study by a third party, Mark Schneep of the Economic Forecast Project, and he's just last week produced the report. We gave it to the Corps right in time for their budget, and that saved Ventura, a similar study. Ventura did not get its funding a year or two ago. They produced a similar report and got their funding reinstated. So it's always a scary question. Obviously, this year's problem was not funding related. The funding was there. It was just a contractual issue and bad timing with a bad storm that shut us down for a short while.
So that's actually how it works. It's harbor specific. It's not some global decision in Washington that they're not going to support small harbors. There's some kind of cost-benefit analysis that they do about dredging for specific locations?
Well, their chief criteria is container shipping. So they're really looking at operations and maintenance dredging of big container ship ports like Long Beach, LA Complex, Sacramento, San Francisco, Oakland, yeah. Not so much San Diego. And the ironic thing is Long Beach, LA doesn't really need any maintenance dredging. Unfortunately, all of us other smaller harbors don't have any container shipping, so we're not even on the scale there. So we work together with CMANC to band together and get some of that dredging money distributed among all of the smaller harbors that don't have that kind of commercial shipping, and then we try and exploit and show the funding or the economic impacts that the harbor does have in terms of commercial fishing, the Coast Guard being here for security and so forth.
How many other small harbors are there like that in the country? Are we in that group of?
Oh, I don't know in the country. California, I mean, you've got Port San Luis, Morro Bay, Ventura, Channel Islands. Monterey, definitely. Santa Cruz.
No even guess about the number in the country, though. It's like hundreds or 100?
It would be hundreds, and you know, when you think about the Army Corps of Engineers and what their responsibility is, it's for dredging the Mississippi River, you know, ports in the Great Lakes, the South Coast, Gulf states. They're enormous responsibility.
Does the city still pay a lobbyist in D.C. to help with this?
$1,600 a month, yes.
Yeah.
Same lobbyist.
Same lobbyist.
Well,
Del Smith.
Del Smith has handed the reins off to R.J. Lyerly, but same firm.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Hotchkiss?
Thank you, Madam Pro Tem. There have been some questions about the cruise ships. Do we break out anywhere the revenues that we think we get directly to the city from the cruise ships? I didn't see it here, but maybe I missed it.
Mayor Pro Tem, Councilmember Hotchkiss, yes, we do internally break those down. It varies between ship and how many passengers as well as crew members they have on that.
Right.
And then you have to take out things such as charges for the police department, our public works permits, our MTD, the shuttle that they run on those particular days. And that equates to about those fees we pay are probably about 33 to 35% of the gross. And so I'd say on an average ship, it fluctuates between $9,000 and $12,000.
Directly to the city, to the harbor department.
That would, yes. Of course, we're also going to be adding in we're looking at adding in that $76,000 that we talked about earlier from our portion of the MTD shuttle on the side. So it works out to we get about 66% of what they give us in the end.
66% of?
Of that, of the head fee, which is $5 per head.
Okay, but I'm not doing all the numbers in my head here.
There's a lot of numbers going on in my head
is
too.
it possible? Is it difficult to do that?
No, not at all. We have that, and we look at that regularly. It ends up being, depending on the size of the ship and the number of passengers, between $9,000 and $12,000 per ship.
But to have a cogent discussion, we should see that at some point.
Okay,
Thank
I'd be
you.
happy to do that.
Mr. Hart, is that you? Yeah.
Just one other little interesting twist. I'm sure you're well aware about this, but I'm not sure the other council members are. The Police and Fire Commission, just most recently, the fire chief was talking about the fact that the cruise ships there's an increasing need to respond to emergencies on cruise ships through the fire department, and that there's going to be the fire department is going to have a conversation with other harbors that also have cruise ships to find out, who's responsible really for responding to those kinds of things, and what does that mean in terms of staffing for the fire department for very specialized response. This is something completely different than all the equipment that the fire department has for our fighting fires on land. And is it the fire department's responsibility to deal with an emergency on a cruise ship, or is it the harbor? Is it the Coast Guard, or what is the rules, and how is that all supposed to work out? And I guess this is just a super very beginning conversation, but it's something that probably needs to be paid attention to, because it theoretically is a big problem if there were a serious emergency on a cruise ship.
Councilmember Hart, we've had our initial discussion with Chief McElroy and our Harbor Patrol Supervisor, Steve McCullough, and myself, and we're organizing a larger meeting to discuss how to respond to some of these things. But so far, there have been a couple of medical calls and things like that they will stage at the launch ramp, and we'll either go out in our Harbor Patrol boats, or they'll bring the person in on a tender, and then AMR will take them from there. But it is a new thing for us to.
Mr. White?
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. And you do put in the budget, at least the big book, your estimate of the number of passengers. So if you're talking about $5 a head, then that's $200,000 for FY14 and $300 for 50 projected. I guess that goes from adopted to projected. It's $300,000. So that's the total number that you would be getting in. What did you call it? The head fee or something like that?
Probably a per passenger fee or manifest,
or
yeah.
whatever. But that if we do have that conversation to project that into even what the financial impacts of that group is as well would be helpful. Just how much. I know there have been estimates, and I expect that you can garner some good information on that, and that would be useful for us to hear about as well.
Is that a sort of Mark Schneep thing that we could commission? I don't know how expensive that is. But
That was quite expensive. Visit Santa Barbara recently did a report that I would expect.
Yeah, I've heard some figures, but they just seem to me like ballpark. I don't know.
They did a pretty detailed report. We could email that to the council, at least so you could get a
Okay.
basic familiarity of that.
Okay, no need to duplicate work. Thank you.
As the conversation goes on, I'm supporting Councilmember White's suggestion that we perhaps have a public hearing about cruise ships. I know that they do generate an economic boost, which is really important to our general fund functions. But when the passengers had norovirus, my email was lit up that week, and people really concerned about, and some people didn't understand you can't just quarantine individuals on a ship. And I think, Mr. Reedman, you had put out an email that people have civil rights, that you can't limit their movements, and people didn't seem to understand that. But there was a slight panic sort of going on, and but it seems like a great idea to talk about the economics of it, and what's positive about it, and then what you're dealing with. And so I would leave that to Mr. Armstrong, maybe, to figure out how we can have a hearing on it. People are talking about our cruise ships visits. This is absolutely true. So maybe a public hearing, they can speak their piece. Is there anything else on waterfront? Congratulations on your excellent department. Thank you. And next is solid waste. Is that right? Which is part of our finance department. And we're moving along so fast, no need for a break of any kind? Right? Okay. Whenever you're ready, Mr. Four. Okay.
All right. Good afternoon, Madam Mayor Pro Tem, council members. My name is Matt Four. I'm the Environmental Services Manager, and I'll be reviewing the recommended budget for fiscal year 15 for the Environmental Services Division Solid Waste Fund. Similar to the other presentations you've heard today, I'll be following a similar outline, give you a little bit about the division as a whole, go through the budget overview, talk about changes to the originally adopted FY15 plan, talk a little bit about the proposed fees, and then our key work objectives for the coming year. So the things that environmental services, if we look at the key responsibilities, I put them into three categories. The first key objective or responsibility of environmental services is to preserve valuable and finite landfill capacity. We've been in front of your council many times talking about how expensive it is to landfill waste. And we look at short-term costs, but more importantly, we're looking at long-term costs, because when Tehaguas is filled up, and we are looking at the next few options as well as other jurisdictions around the state, constructing new landfills is extremely expensive. So we put a lot of effort into preserving that valuable airspace, is what we call it, in landfills. To that end, we work with hundreds of businesses and schools, and now more recently multi-unit properties to establish recycling programs to help them get that material from the trash can into the blue or the green container and keep it out of the landfill. We manage the Marburg franchise agreement, and that's really one of the linchpins to our diversion success, is if we can get customers to maximize the services that are already contained in the franchise agreement, then we win. We stay in compliance with state regulation, and we preserve landfill space. And then the third thing is we do a lot of mass media outreach. So when we're setting up recycling programs, that's more one-to-one or boots on the ground, as we call it. And then we do a lot of advertising. And you probably have seen the slew of ads that we put out for our e-waste event that we just held this weekend, the Spirit of Service Awards that are Thursday, and all those things. The second large category that we put a lot of effort into is ensuring appropriate end of life for all materials. So we talked about your typical commingled recycling, but we also do a lot of work in the household hazardous waste realm. And that's more for toxicity, but we don't want those things to go into the landfill. We pay a sizable amount every year of our budget toward a cooperative HHW facility out at UCSB. And under our franchise agreement, Marburg also operates what's called an ABOP facility to take antifreeze, batteries, oils, and paint. We implemented new programs in our franchise agreement like curbside battery and cell phone collection, sharps disposal, and things like that. The single-use bag ordinance is another example of getting materials to the right place, right? So that the uncaptured bags don't become litter. And then finally, getting materials to the right place, there is a place for code enforcement. And so we don't want material to be illegally disposed. We want that to get into the trash can and make its way appropriately to a landfill. And the third key area that we work in a lot is planning for the city's future needs. And just to give you a couple of examples, we review hundreds of plans every year as part of the city's development review process to make sure that proposed developments are sized appropriately or have enclosures that are sized appropriately for not only trash but also for diversion services. One of our key objectives that you'll see a little bit later is we are developing or revising our waste enclosure guidelines for developers and architects. We do a lot of work on the potential resource recovery project along with the county and several other jurisdictions. And then also looking at developing the next set of language for the next franchise agreement after 2023. You know, we're always keeping our eye on where that's going to go. So to that end, how we organize ourselves, there's a manager, myself. We have a vacant supervisor position. I have 3 specialists that are the professional class that do the majority of the work I just described. A couple or 1.5 FTEs of the recycling educators, a little bit of code enforcement, and some outreach staff. So to get into the budget for FY15, if we start with the appropriations, appropriations for FY15 are about $20.3 million, and as you'll see on this pie graph, the majority of that pie goes toward hauler services. It's really a direct pass-through of the collections that we take in from customer rates, and it goes out to Marburg, our service provider that provides all those services. We then have salaries and benefits for the staff that I just showed. Special projects are primarily our HHW costs. Those are the shared costs that we pay the county as part of a joint effort, and then some other miscellaneous categories. Similarly, on revenues, our majority revenue of 87% is solid waste fees. And again, that's the revenue that we take in from trash and recycling bills from customers. We then have program fees that fund the environmental services operations. And then recycling revenues is the third category, and that's funding that we receive from commingled recycling that we collect in carts, cans, and dumpsters that have traditionally gone down to Gold Coast Recycling in Ventura. And most recently this year, we have worked out a revenue sharing agreement with Marburg for a portion of that material as well. So looking at the proposed changes for FY15, it's really a status quo budget. There are very few changes for FY15 when compared to the original plan. Hauler services are slightly lower because the CPI adjustment that we provide to Marburg is lower than what we had forecast. And then the other item of note is the special projects. That's really lower HHW costs than what we had budgeted as well. And the final one I'll just mention, its supplies and services are about $14,000 less, and that really reflects our reduced rent that we will be paying in FY15 with the inclusion of the 911 Operations Center that's currently occurring now. If we look at revenues, revenues are slightly higher than what we had originally budgeted. Solid waste fees are coming in a little bit higher, and that's there are some one-time costs or one-time fee surcharges, I should say, non-recurring fee surcharges in our new rate schedule that went into effect that were pretty hard to forecast. And I'll give you an example of that. In our fee schedule, we have surcharges for slope and distance, for example. So if a home is located way up a driveway, up a curvy driveway, and the hauler has to go a long way to go get a container, then a customer pays more. We also have things like cart in place surcharges, where, as you'll recall, under our new rate schedule, to receive the lowest rate in the city, customers roll their carts to the curb. If a customer decides to have the boutique service of having a cart but having Marborg's personnel come on the property and empty it and drag it back to the truck, they pay a little bit more. Our fees on those are coming in a little bit higher than what we had forecast. And other than that, the only other item on the revenues that's coming in a little bit higher is the recycling revenues, and that's for two reasons. The first part is that revenues in FY13, which is what we get paid on, and we get paid 2 years in arrears. So our FY15 recycling revenue reflects what actually occurred in FY13. When we looked at the first 6 months of FY13, they were nosediving again. We were seeing the commodity markets really fall. And in the second 6 months of FY13, we saw some improvement. So for that reason, our revenues are coming in a little bit higher. The second reason is that the new agreement for recyclable revenue sharing that we have executed with Marborg this year is coming in. We frankly negotiated a better deal than what we budgeted. So we're seeing revenues come in slightly higher on that.
Okay, Mr. Hotchkiss.
Quick question. How do we get revenues out of Looking Good Santa Barbara?
Looking Good Santa Barbara is a program that's funded by Marborg to about $80,000 a year as part of the contractual provisions in the franchise agreement.
So this is from Marburg then?
Yes.
All right.
Any other questions? Okay. So I'll go into a little bit on the proposed fees. These next few slides we did share with the Finance Committee back on March 4th. We are proposing 4 changes to the proposed fees this year. A CPI increase, tipping fee increases, and then I want to talk about public container funding for the roughly 1,300 or 1,400 public containers that we have around the city, and then also rebalancing the cart and can rates in the multi-unit residential sector. So the first 2 components are adjustments that we bring to you every year. They're contractual obligations that the city must implement as part of our contract with Marborg, and that's that we adjust rates to compensate Marborg for adjustments in the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. This year, the index increase is about 0.8%, and we also have very small increases in tipping fees, and these are the fees that we pay the disposal and processing facilities that we take our materials to, but they're very scant this year. So the total contractually obligated increase is 0.9%. The third item, and I'll get to that, but we are proposing another adjustment to the fees to fund the repair and replacement of public containers. And so for about 2 years, Environmental Services has undertaken a container-by-container evaluation of the about 1,350 to 1,400 public containers that we have throughout the city. We have about 21 different types. Many of them were put in using redevelopment agency funding some years ago. They were put in, and then the oversight and repair and replacement of that has been sort of diffused throughout the city. So we undertook a physical evaluation of them to see what their current condition is and then what it would take in terms of dollars and time to keep them in a presentable condition. We then developed a repair and replacement schedule and identified the funding need for that, and we drafted a policy to coordinate oversight among all the stakeholders, both internally with the city as well as with external organizations like MTD and the downtown organization and others that have an interest in the containers.
If I could ask, do we sell those scrapped containers for scrap or what?
We do. They're metal and they have very high value for that.
Thank you.
So in terms of the work to be completed on the public containers, the next step then is to take that repair and replacement schedule of the types of containers that we are looking to consolidate, and we're really looking to go from about 21 container types down to about 6 that are manageable. And then to establish, to bring that to the ABR and HLC for master plan approval so we can go and swap those out at will with one approval from them without having to go back multiple times. And then establish a stable funding mechanism to fund the repair and replacement. And our recommendation then is to adjust rates across the board on all trash and recycling customers by 0.7%. And that would generate about $147,000, which would then be the funding mechanism for us to, every few years, repaint them, bang the dents out, replace the cigarette butlers, replace the liners, and then when they reach the end of life, to swap them out with a new container.
Mr. Rouse has a question.
Sure.
Thank you. Mr. Farrar, would you translate the 0.7% into what an average customer is going to end up having to pay to fund this?
Sure, it's about 20 cents a month.
So that'd be the average residential user?
Yes.
And then I do remember the discussion back when we had the other cans designed and put together and the expense and whatnot. So obviously the goal here is to simplify that program and not have well, obviously you want a state-of-the-art trash can, but it was considered to be kind of overboard back then. So that'll be a consideration for us or HLC or for ABR or all the above.
Well, we're bringing to the ABR and HLC a couple of different containers. I'll give you an example. For those that have been installed as part of a entitlement process, so Chase Palm Park, for example, we're going to stick with the same type that's already been approved by the city. The downtown organization, the real nice ones called the Paseos on State Street, we're proposing to keep those as is. For the other ones, for the parks, for example, we're proposing a container that's about a quarter of the cost of what we're seeing now. It's one that the Parks Department has piloted. It's durable. It holds up. So we're bringing a plan that reflects prior entitlements, but is also good value, lasts, because we don't want to be out there swapping those out every 2 years. We'd like to refurbish them several times before we get to the end of life.
And the reason for this upgraded fee is that before this, we haven't had a source that was dedicated to this purpose. Is that the idea?
That's true. Environmental Services has put a couple $1,000s toward this every year, and it's mostly been as a result of a fire, for example, when somebody throws a cigarette into the trash container instead of the cigarette butler, it lights it on fire and melts the liner, so we've been replacing a lot of liners. The other damage that we see quite often is that the cigarette butlers are kicked off, or people will kick them to try to get them open, and so we have to do a lot of re-welding to get them to attach.
Thank you.
So to put all three of those together, and so you can see the total increase that we are proposing. The first is the CPI increase of 0.81%. The second is the tipping fee increases, and the third is the 0.7% for public container maintenance. So our total proposed across the board increase for all customer classes this year is 1.6%. And I just wanted to put that in perspective of what does that mean? We only come to you once a year. So you'll see that it's still on the low end. We're recommending this for this year because we think that the timing is good. In 2012, our increase 3.5%, 2.7%. The other components of our rates are traditionally low or historically low, and we think this is a good year then from a timing standpoint to go ahead and add this public container fee.
Go ahead.
So once again, would you translate the 1.6 into the average user's bill?
It is, I will get you that. Let me get you that at the end of the presentation.
Just people feel, put upon a nickel and dime, just kind of what's this actually going to cost on their bill?
Yeah.
If 0.70 is 20 cents, it's about 45 cents.
On the single family. That's the residential. And so the last component that we're...
Excuse me, just a quick question. That increase will be ongoing, or since we're buying these one time, can it be for just a year or two?
That will be an ongoing. That's the amortized cost over about a 35-year period.
I see.
So this will turn over our entire inventory by about 2037. So the last component of our rates is not a rate increase per se. This is a revenue neutral proposal that we have to rebalance the multi-unit residential rates. And really, it's to rebalance the relationship between trash, recycling, green waste that's in a carton can. Those are, everybody knows what a trash can is without wheels and handles. The carts are the integrated lid with the wheels that we roll. And then the dumpsters are the really big metal commercial and big apartment containers that we have. So historically, carton can service was priced much lower than dumpsters, much lower, to about 25% less. And this is something that we brought to the City Council when we were negotiating the new contract rates with Marburg. And we said we would like to correct this. Right now there's a definite channeling of customers to carts and cans because they are less expensive, but it doesn't always meet the customer needs. And so when we brought the 2013 contract to you, we said we are proposing to close that gap and bring the cost of carts and cans to within 10%, and then stop there. And we didn't want to go any further. But our plan was always to every year adjust this slightly until the equivalent cost of any material in a cart, can, and dumpster is equal. We don't want to shift people to one container or another. We want them to choose the container that meets their needs and then pay the equivalent price. So that's where we are. We made a big step when we put the new rate schedule into place with Marburg, and this is just a continuation of that to do that. So the problem, as I said, carts and cans don't always meet the customer needs. One thing I learned in negotiating the new contract with Marburg is that multi-unit properties are very different. Some are long and narrow, some are wide, some have a lot of units, some are quads and duplexes, and there wasn't one set of services that met everyone's needs. And so we want to provide better customer service and accommodate that. Dumpsters also, they save physical space. They accommodate bulky items like big cardboard that carts don't. And as you'll recall, the dumpsters, there is no in-place service charge. Customer doesn't have to roll a dumpster to the curb to get the lowest rate. It just happens. Whereas with carts, the customer has to roll those carts to the curb. So take, for example, a customer that has, we have big apartment buildings that because of the pricing incentive have a boatload of carts. They have a sea of carts in the back. Well, somebody's got to roll all those to the curb, or they have to pay the surcharge, the in-place surcharge. So what we're proposing is to equalize the rate structure so that we can get them into a dumpster and alleviate some of that burden. So our solution then is to rebalance the relationship between carts and cans to within 5%. So this would take carts and cans from 90% the price of trash to 95%. It won't completely correct it, but we think we can make a good progress. Again, this is revenue neutral. This does not pay Marburg a single cent more. This is not a rate increase that pays the hauler. This simply shifts revenue from two different container types in the multi-unit sector. We also wanted to hold the maximum fee increase due to this one change to no more than 2%. And so we've done that for every customer. We ran a rate analysis on every single multi-unit customer, and nobody will experience more than 2%. We said we think that the timing is good, similar to the public containers. Our overall rate increases are low this year, and it will provide greater flexibility for our customers. So to put all of this together, these four components of our rate increases, what does it look like for typical customers? This is a chart that you've seen just about every year. The first service level up there on the top row, this is a sort of a common single-family residential service that has a 65-gallon trash cart, a 65-gallon green waste, and a 65-gallon recycling cart. They would see the 1.6% rate increase that we talked about. If we look at the multi-unit, the second row there, the multi-unit residential, this is a multi-unit residential customer with lots of carts and cans. So this customer has 15 carts or cans on their property, and they're going to see a 3.9% increase. Conversely, if we look at the multi-unit residential dumpster customer, they're going to see a slight decrease in their rates because we're, again, shifting that relationship between carts, cans, and dumpsters. So dumpsters get a little bit less expensive, carts get a little bit more expensive, but we do so on a revenue neutral basis. And then if we look at the business sector, 2 business customers, one is a small carton can customer. They will, just like the single-family residential, see the 1.6%, and the business dumpster service sees the across-the-board 1.6% increase. So before I go on to the performance objectives, I just want to stop and see if there are any questions on this.
I see no lights, Mr.
Okay.
Force, so go,
Good, I'll
go ahead.
Keep going. So FY15, for our major work objectives for FY15, the resource recovery project is going to continue to be a large emphasis for us. In FY15, we do anticipate continuing and even doing so more in earnest of negotiating business terms with the vendor, Mustang Renewable Power Ventures, which is our preferred vendor. We'll also be refining our tonnage commitments, and as you'll recall, if we were to join this project, the city will be committing its waste to the project, and we'll be refining those tonnage commitments. We'll also continue to refine the structure of contractual agreements between the county and the participating jurisdictions and the vendor, or in other words, how are we going to organize ourselves as the public participants so that we can oversee and manage the contract with the vendor, and we'll continue to work out those matters. The second item is we're going to continue to put a large emphasis on the environmental services role in development review. And this is something that we started last fiscal year, where we developed several archetypes of typical customers, from multi-unit properties to a whole slew of business types, to get a handle on how much waste and other materials they might generate. So we've put together profiles on, I'll give you food facilities. We often see is 40% food scraps, 20% recycling, 20% trash. And so how do we take that and translate that into the enclosure space that's needed for them to have capacity throughout the long term? And this is something I'm really passionate about, because this replaces or ensures capacity on the front end so that my staff doesn't go out after the fact and put together very complex, very often contentious bin sharing agreements between 10 different businesses in a highly densified downtown. So we've completed the waste generator profiles, and this year we're going to take those profiles and what we learned and translate that into a revised enclosure guideline that we can then give to developers and architects on the front end before they start developing a project. They can accommodate the materials that they're likely to generate, and then it streamlines the approval on our end to get their plans passed and let them get on to the entitlement process. And then the last item is the public containers, and what I mentioned of bringing that master plan of containers to ABR and HLC for consideration. And with that, I'd be glad to take any other questions.
Any questions? I wanted to ask how it was going with the single-use plastic bags. So is May 14th the date that we're coming up on that? Are you getting any phone calls? And
We're getting lots of phone calls, and we're making lots of phone calls. So we've done, what you'll see coming out very soon is a television spot that we recently produced with City Television. We have personally contacted all of the grocery stores and pharmacies that will be regulated. They are well on board. Excuse me. I don't think there'll be any surprises in the first phase that kicks off in May 14th. And then, as you recall, the smaller stores will commence in November. We've really turned our attention toward the smaller stores to help them get ready for that. But it's going well.
Very good. Mr. Hart?
And then can you just help me more with the timeline for the resource recovery project? This next year, you're going to, I saw this slide that has your goals for this next year.
Sure.
Can you give me some more background on that?
Sure. We have a couple of major items going. One is the environmental review for the project, and that will supersede many of the other tasks by law, as a matter of fact. So, excuse me. So we are anticipating the environmental impact report, the draft environmental impact report, being released sometime around June of this year. And that could wrap up as early as fall. But, we'll see how it goes. It's a big project, but we've worked a lot with the county on that. I haven't seen the document, but my understanding is it's fairly robust and very complete document. So we'll see how that goes. But on the environmental review side, we have that. We have the whole CEQA process. The second prong then is the refining the technical and how that will translate into business terms or contractual provisions. So we are going to continue to refine performance objectives on things like diversion and on tipping fees, on to what extent the vendor can take spot market waste to make up capacity. We'll be doing our tonnage commitments that will tell the vendor what's the minimum size you have to have that you'll base your tipping fees on, and what's the peak capacity that we'll want you to take on a real robust period. So we've got that whole technical side and translate that into business terms on the other hand. And then as, I guess, a third part of that is, again, how the public participants organize themselves so that we can manage the contract with the vendor.
So how, of those three things in the next fiscal year, the first one is probably going to be done. The second one and the third one, will those be done in that fiscal year, or will they be, are those longer than that projects?
What I would say is that the finalizing the business terms with the vendor is really predicated on the certification of the EIR.
Right.
So I can tell you that we will be knee-deep in the EIR this year. We are doing a lot of due diligence on the side regarding business terms, but it really depends on when we wrap up the environmental review process to when we can really jump in and finalize those terms with the vendor.
Okay, fair enough. I get
and
it.
the JPA, I think, will make good progress on this year.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Well, we're back here tomorrow for City Council at 2. Thank you, Mr. Four. Meeting adjourned.
It's a mystery to me, this mutiny at sea.